Good evening, everyone. We will get started just shortly. Just waiting on folks to slowly but surely trickle in, but want to welcome everyone tonight to our webinar with IEC and Environmental Defense Fund to talk about the Health and Equity Insights Act. This is a bill that we have been working very closely with our EJ partners on, especially addressing some of the major issues with air quality across the state. But before we get started, just want to go over a couple community agreements before fully jumping in. Please maintain your microphone on mute so the presenter can speak. We will have an opportunity to ask questions. We also do have the chat function where folks can drop comments or bring any information in. And if you do have a question, feel free to drop in a chat, or during the question and answer portion, you can feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you. Now, before we fully get started, I want to do a quick introduction of myself. My name is Dany Robles. I will be your host tonight for this webinar. I am Illinois' Environmental Climate Policy Director, and I'm really excited to be able to present this for folks. Over the last few years, IEC has taken a bigger role in advocating to protect our climate and environment by targeting transportation, especially in the way that air quality is being affected by our transportation systems. Something that we're going to learn a lot about tonight is how the number of warehouses in Illinois has expanded exponentially. However, the air monitors across the state has not matched this growth. Diesel trucks currently threaten a lot of health for Illinois communities. Although they only make 7% of the vehicles on the road, they are the disproportionate amount of pollutants, including 36% of all greenhouse gas emissions, 67% of nitrogen oxide, and 59% of fine particulate matter. So this bill is designed to increase the number of air monitors across the state to identify those hotspots for remediation and to gain insight on where the emissions are the worst and where do we need to create impact for communities overburdened with diesel pollution. And tonight with us, we have one of the architects of this bill who will talk at length of dive a little deeper into the information that helped create the bill, what is in it, and help answer any questions and address concerns from the audience about the particular bill. So I'd like to introduce my colleague, Netta Delamy, who is the manager of vehicle electrification for the Environmental Defense Fund and one of our state experts on EV policies and charging infrastructure and equity. Netta started her EV advocacy journey in 2018 as an owner, organizing for greater access to charging for renters and those living in multi-unit dwellings. Since then, she has worked to advance electric vehicle adoption and policies across the country, particularly here in the Midwest, at the city, state, and regional level. As an attorney, she has drafted legislation and provided expert testimony on cost-effective EV charging infrastructure, equitable rights to charge access for all, and most recently, she wrote and passed SB 40, the Electric Vehicle Charging Act, that expands charging infrastructure in newly constructed or renovated single-family homes. So, much further ado, I would like to introduce Netta.
Cool. Thanks, Dany. That was such a cool intro. I sound so cool and smart. So I hope I do this bill justice as well. So yeah, as Dany said, I started out doing light duty electric vehicle policy, but I think medium and heavy duty vehicle policy, which I'll get into now, is a growing issue that we're trying to solve and improve the same way that we were doing with light duty about 5, 6, 7 years ago. So tonight we're going to be talking about Illinois' warehouse pollution, in particular trucks, medium heavy duty vehicles, but warehouses are kind of the worst of the worst offenders. Did the slide change for everybody? Okay, just making sure. So, to talk about the problem at hand, transportation pollution, you've probably heard in the past few years that transportation pollution is the worst offender of carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, but there are also pollutants that make people sick in it. So medium heavy duty vehicles are the worst offenders of this. Medium heavy duty vehicles are trucks and buses, delivery vans in particular. They are dangerous because they cause diseases like childhood asthma and lung diseases of like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, stroke, heart issues. And it's getting worse because online shopping is increasing. The distribution and warehouse industries are growing very, very quickly. And these are the kinds of industries that attract trucks. We have air monitors in place, but they are not growing with that growth. And they are not tracking the pollution that has grown with that, with those trucks. It's also disproportionate. So communities of color are, and those living in poverty are the most affected and overburdened by that pollution. 2 million people in Illinois live within half a mile of a warehouse. 127,000 of them are children under the age of 5. And Black and Hispanic or Latino populations live near warehouses at rates much higher than you would expect based off of the population that they are in Illinois, 37 and 95% higher respectively. Because they live near truck attracting facilities like warehouses more often, the existing data we have from monitors, which is not adequate, doesn't show this burden that they carry more often. So the health effects of air pollution. The reason that diesel is so much worse than gasoline is the pollutants that they emit more densely than gasoline. It's basically a more dense fuel. It has more yucky stuff in it, like nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter. I'm a CPS kid, Chicago Public Schools, so I rode the school bus, that school bus smell every day. The nitrogen dioxide in it, in diesel pollution is something that irritates your respiratory system. The particulate matter pollutants in it can be so small that go deep inside your lungs and bloodstream. It causes the diseases that I mentioned, like childhood asthma seen here, and children of color are the most affected. Like in Chicago, where a Black child is 4 times more likely to go to the ER for asthma than a white child. And as Dany mentioned, each vehicle makes a big impact. There's a lot of them, but they only make up 7% of all the vehicles. And regardless of that, disproportionately, 2/3 of nitrogen oxide and 59% of fine particulate matter. But warehouses are a big draw of trucks. So here is a map of red dots of warehouses, blue squares of NO2 monitors, excuse me, and green squares of particulate matter 2.5, the really small ones, monitors. There's only 37 monitors total, and less than half of them collect samples once a day. Only 10 are close to a warehouse. So that's super inadequate to actually accurately, precisely capture the real picture of pollution for people who live nearby, neighbors, schools, parks. Meanwhile, warehouses are growing. There has been a 30% increase in square footage in the last 10 years, and over 500,000, 525,000 truck trips to service all of the warehouses we have in Illinois. 424,000 of them are only in Chicagoland. But in the last 17 years, we've added 8 new monitoring stations, and 17 of them have gone inactive. So the ratio of monitoring of warehouses to monitors, although they aren't close to each other, have gone from 40 to 65. It's not nearly enough. And it's important to mention that the database that is available to track where these warehouses are in this map only includes leased warehouses, about 2,400. So our analysis actually doesn't include an unknown amount of warehouses that could be a significant amount. And that's why this bill is needed, because it will require the state to actually identify and list publicly all the warehouse locations that there actually are in the state. Here's another map of Cook County showing the disproportionate effect on warehouse locations and the percentage of population that is Hispanic or Latino. You can see the overlap. And as I mentioned, across the board, Black, Hispanic, or Latino, and those living in poverty all live within half a mile of a warehouse at higher rates than you'd expect, and white populations are less exposed. This is a cool zoomed in, relatively zoomed in map of a house district near Romeoville and Bolingbrook. Lots of warehouses along that diagonal of I-55. An overburdened Hispanic and Latino population there with 0 monitors. So the bill itself, called Health and Equity Insights Act, broadly, the goals are, and I'll go into detail, what is the pollution? What are the sources? What types are there? How much of it is there? What are the impacts on the people around the sources of the pollution? And then what can we do to empower the neighbors of those truck attracting facilities and warehouses? And how can we arm the public with that information to engage in how to mitigate it? How can we provide grants to build on the community monitoring work that's already been done for decades? How can we protect workers? How can we keep the state accountable and transparent with what they find? And then use all this to actually reduce the pollution. So one step is to actually increase the monitoring. It seeks to address the long history of inadequate monitoring in our state, giving communities power to determine where new monitors will be located. So truck attracting facilities like warehouses have to monitor on-site emissions for diesel particulate matter, nitrogen oxides with at least 4 continuous, not once a day, fence line monitors around the perimeter. Communities can request new federal grade monitors, and those are the ones that EPA uses to make attainment decisions based on satellite or low-cost local data, health data, if there's been recent changes in land use, or other metrics that the overburdened communities want to mention. And even though the bill has a lot of mentions of warehouses, this doesn't have to be restricted to warehouses. They can request more monitors for any source. So as I mentioned, it has to be but the federal grade monitors that are not continuous have to become continuously monitoring within a year of passage. And there will also be required yearly truck counts at random representative samples at local intersections in warehouse dense areas. And this will also have to be done in consultation with community organizations that have been doing this for years. Another way to regulate truck pollution. There are hundreds of thousands of truck trips, as I mentioned, going in and out of the warehouses. And one way to regulate them is an indirect source review. This is a rule that requires warehouse operators of a certain size, big ones, at least 100,000 square feet, or a set of facilities that in aggregate are greater than 500,000 square feet, or any facility that within consultation of communities and the agency, threaten local health because of some individual impact or cumulative impact. Those warehouse operators have to follow this facility by facility compliance system based off of a menu of options. So this is already being done in Southern California, and how the warehouses stay compliant. They have to first purchase a permit and then earn points based on all their truck trips by taking actions off of this menu, like getting zero emission vehicles, purchasing or leasing them. They can install zero emissions fueling infrastructure for those vehicles. They can install and use solar panels and energy storage for that solar panel, or have air filters at nearby buildings for neighbors who are nearby. They can also use alternatives to truck trips that might be polluting. And in the case if they do that, that would displace a worker that would be driving that truck. They have to consult and agree with that worker to do so, including if that worker is represented by a union. Okay, so we have all these monitors up, then what? The state has to review and publish data publicly, accessibly, information about that, the sources and pollution that they find, like what kind of pollutants there are, what kind of significant emitters that are highest priority. They must provide tools for communities to make sense of it all, what kind of industries it's coming from, how to integrate the data that they might have from their non-regulatory grade monitors. And then the state also has to disclose impacts for a variety of factors from health, education, economy. So ER visits due to pollution-related disease or diagnoses, missed work and school days, school attendance and graduation rates, labor force participation, productivity, and tax rates. And then as well, every year, publish information publicly, of course, about warehouses and truck attracting facilities that you might want to know if you are a neighbor of one of those things. Like who owns it? Who's lending to the owners? How big are they actually? Are they compliant? Have there been any labor violations? How many truck trips are going in and out? How far are those trucks going? Who owns those trucks? Are they leased? Are they installing or have they installed any zero emission vehicle charging infrastructure? And then investing in a cleaner future. So there's a grant program. The grant program is designed to collaborate with overburdened communities and representatives to build on existing community air monitoring networks, and then identify sources, impacts of pollution that are of concern to those communities, and build workforce development. The application process of the grant and then the applications themselves for the grant will be reviewed by an advisory council to make sure that it's accessible and awards go to who they should be going to in the community. What advisory council? Well, this advisory council will be charged with making findings and recommendations on matters of environmental justice in the state, how to use federal funding, and they'll also be charged with doing an initial and yearly assessment of the indirect source reviews, how well the process is going with public participation, how well they're engaging with the community, how transparent facility review is going, as well as with the truck count, whether they have whether the consultant, if there has been one to be hired to do the truck review, is approved by them or not. So it's at least 4 members representing disadvantaged communities where possible, plus representatives from state agencies like Department of Public Health, Human Services, and Transportation. And the council can also choose to add members from labor organizations, manufacturers, faith-based organizations, and health organizations. How will we pay for it? How will you enforce it? So the facilities that must register in the indirect source review have to register have to pay to register for a permit. The minimum fee that will be up to rulemaking to decide has to be enough to reimburse health insurance and care for warehouse neighbors. Some amount, as decided in consultation with neighbors, will go to the grants program, pay for monitors and materials that communities need to provide education on monitoring air quality and the impacts of pollution. There will be fines for non-compliance that will also go to the grants program and in consultation with communities that based on need. Infrastructure investment, like on zero emission vehicles, mitigating pollution, paying for monitors, and healthcare. Generally, the fees and fines will go to the Environmental Protection Trust Fund. And then on investigation, every year, there will be investigations of a random selection of stationary indirect sources of at least 5 or 10%, depending on where. So 5% for non-overburdened communities or 10% of overburdened communities. Or if there is an area where there are more than 500 kids living within a half-mile, any source in that area can be randomly selected to be investigated. Additionally, upon request, communities can request an investigation of a source, which will be granted upon right if the source is a known high emitter, or if the community is a known overburdened community. These results, the investigation results, any mitigation strategies that are recommended, and all of the tools that are used, like fence line monitoring, data, any land use changes made recently, truck counts, truck defeat devices, anything communities ID as necessary, and the resulting data from it will be made public and should be made public so that people can use those tools. That's it. Just that. So that's a lot of info. I'll stop for questions.
A lot of info. Thank you so much, Netta. There are a couple of questions in the chat. The first one that I want to address comes from Larry Evans about the bill identification number. Larry, I'm getting confirmation on that bill confirmation number. We did submit it to the Legislative Review Bureau last week, and we just got the number back. I'm not 100% sure if it's been introduced, but I will find out before the end of the call. Second question comes from Chris White. Will this ordinance require warehouses to have a license or just a registration?
It requires a permit with the Illinois EPA, but the exact specifics of how the process with registering and all that would go through rulemaking, but they require a permit to function. Beyond that, does that answer your question?
So they would have to have a permit.
Yeah, they have to pay to register for a permit. And then anything that any truck trips they have to pay, they have to use menu options to get points to satisfy the compliance.
Um, would there be like conditions of the permit that they have to comply with? Outside of just paying it and getting the permit? Like, would there be like a reason the permit might get denied or not?
I- Sorry, is Sam here? I think,
Sam Corona? No, I'm covering this
no,
for him. He's at Bowen alumni.
No, Sam Becker.
no, I have a colleague here that works in other states that are introducing similar legislation. I think so, but I'm not complete. I don't want to misrepresent what it says. So I think that there is something about staying in compliance with any kind of new, if there's any kind of modification to the facility or like that, that would trigger new pollution, that they would have to account for that. But
Would, would Yeah. Would there be any kind of like community process required of getting a
yeah.
permit, or would there be like any like are there working condition requirements possibly of the permit, or just the pollution? It's just related to pollution.
So the whole point of the source review is that there's a kind of facility by facility review, and with public participation in the process of engaging, like what each facility is attracting as far as pollution, and what mitigation sources or what mitigation strategies they can employ. And part of the advisory council's role is also seeing how transparent, assessing how transparent that process is in the first year as well.
All right. Um, second question from Chris is ISC going to push for cumulative impacts legislation, this session, or just this bill? Chris, I'm not sure if is there cumulative impacts legislation that you've seen be introduced yet? Because if there is, I mean, we would like to review it and help push that along.
I mean, I'm not really at liberty to discuss it. There's a local ordinance that's similar to the one that you're talking about tonight. There's a
Yeah,
local proposal. I think I've mentioned it to you before in connection with the people there. I don't want to like say a lot about it because they're not
yeah,
ready to be public yet.
yeah.
Well,
I
no,
know
but I
that.
mean, I'm just saying I went to a lot of meetings even after the session about the future of pushing for assessment.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Even if it had to be rewritten because it didn't pass a couple sessions in a row. But like,
yeah.
I haven't heard anything lately about if there's a plan to write one.
I know for Chicago, we're definitely like working collaboratively with our EJ partners to move the cumulative impact assessment. I don't think we've seen one fully for the state level outside of like the EJ permitting bill that addresses some of the same issues. And that is something that we're going to be working closely this session to move because last session we kind of got outplayed by legislative like power move.
Okay, so you are planning to do another EJ air permitting bill or something like it. I didn't know if
Yeah.
this was the substitute for it or if that's coming.
No,
Yeah, we
this
should
is
talk
added.
offline.
Yeah. No, this is additive, Chris. This is something that, we don't want to substitute. This is something that um is just gonna help get better data of like where are the hot spots, and as we're like improving some of the other mechanisms, right? Like reducing um diesel trucks on the road and other like um priorities that will help reduce greenhouse emissions, like we'll have air monitors that can actually track that and show the results. Perfect.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, no problem. I do have another question in the chat from Madeline Benavides with Neighbors for Environmental Justice, wondering if this permitting will only be covering the heavy duty warehouses according to the indirect source rule.
No, it's any truck attracting facility. So those are warehouses, distribution centers, intermodal facilities, including their parking lots, any entry and exit points for vehicles, any fueling infrastructure for their vehicles, not just warehouses, but warehouses are a handy summary for all those. But truck attracting facility is that.
Perfect. Next question in the chat from Kevin Atchison. Plain devil's advocate, have you studied the potential economic impact on the state with this bill?
On the state, I think it would be not on the state. I think the economic impact that might occur would be on, and so it would be triggered when facilities are looking to modify anything that would increase their pollution impact. And instead of doing that, they would be required or penalized if they would not do some kind of mitigation strategy instead. The impact of not doing anything about it would be much, much worse economically than any impact of these requirements. And I think that's what we're trying to avoid with it. The health impacts, the economic impacts, and the educational impacts of failing to regulate truck traffic and pollution impacts. So the net benefit is absolutely positive.
Are there any other questions? Um, Diana, I see you with your hand raised. Before I call on you, I do want to drop in a report that EDF has developed in conjunction with a similar bill that is being presented in New York that can help get a little bit more insight on what we're looking at here in Chicago. But just want to share that for folks to take with and ponder on as we continue having this conversation. So I'm gonna turn it over to you, Deanna, to answer your question.
Hey y'all, Diana from CalStart. So one thing I learned with California is California has, and I can't remember the name right now, but I'm gonna try and put it in the chat later on. California has a similar plan where a lot of the carbon pollutant companies and organizations, if they go over a certain cap, they have to put money into like a certain fund, and that's how a lot of things like environmentally get done in California. But a lot of participants that get money from that fund, like the similar deterrent that Chicago is trying to put in, is saying that it's really a blood money fund and saying that they're not really doing anything different because they just keep going over this cap and they're just kind of paying into, not doing the correct thing. So I was just wondering, is there a way like to deter that in happening in Chicago?
I assume you mean Illinois for this bill, but
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's the hope or the intent with the menu the points that they can occur that make them compliant from the menu are the strategies that actually work to mitigate pollution, like zero emission vehicles that don't have tailpipe emissions, like managed charging and energy storage to charge them, like air filtration for their buildings, and such. So it's not just money. Um, I think another important part of this bill, I think we went to great stakes and will continue to in the process of trying to pass this. And it's built into the bill to engage a lot with communities and what concerns there are and how strategies to implement mitigation that works for them, from the council to how money will be reinvested to the grant program. I think that was a big concern, that not thinking of blood money in California specifically, but making sure that going through the pains of building a program, making sure that it was actually benefiting who it needed to be, and the people making decisions about it were those affected.
Thank you.
Let's see. We have a comment on chat from Marie Collins that impacts Chicago, and particularly the southeast side, because of the interstate trucking into commercial transportation hub. This community serves special rules and policies due to extreme volume of diesel truck traffic. Definitely noted, Marie, and I think I'm gonna call on Amalia, who will probably like agree with you on this. Amalia, would love to turn it over to you for question.
Well, I would like to say that I have personally participated in community science projects where we have literally stood out and done truck counting and have tested for the particulate matter in our community. And the trucks are so huge and they come so frequently, and they're damaging the property owners because they're not following all the routes. They need a special route because we're on the border of Indiana, and lots of commercial trucking is coming through our community, much more than what you would ordinarily see in a neighborhood. So we have to have a special consideration for that. For those are facts, and it impacts the breathing, which is already contaminated with all of the corporations around there that have operated for decades with no supervision. And we also don't have the policing that we once had with the, I do believe the state troopers do most of the policing with the truck traffic. And that has been very limited in the last 20 years. There's no oversight, there's no checking. I rarely see any policing done, and I often see the rules being broken. Only a few days ago, I was at Indianapolis and 106th Street, and I just saw a caravan of humongous trucks just rolling through the red lights. So that was just a small example of how they're not worried, they're not afraid. They feel that they have the liberty to operate any way that they choose. I don't know the rules, and I don't think that they may know the rules in Illinois when they come through the interstate. We have to do more. We have to post more signs. We have to have more rules, and we have to change our attitude and policies before some serious injury occurs, and we need to get control of some of the pollution.
Yeah, Marie, thank you for bringing that up. I think that is something that we're hearing across multiple communities in Illinois. And something that we're also exploring, particularly with the senator that we're introducing this with, Senator Cervantes, He's interested in utilizing technology data in a way to track where trucks are going and a way to enforce them. I think the conversation is still very like fresh, but it's an avenue that we're looking into. Uh, to like you're saying, like making sure that there are direct pathways that trucks need to go, and they're not going into communities, they're not going to neighborhoods that they're not supposed to, and then having that as an additional enforcement. So there's still a bit of development on that process, but those are some of the initial thoughts that have started to percolate with this. So thank you for sharing that. Um, Amalia, I saw you with your hand raised earlier.
Yeah, I ended up putting my questions in chat. I was just trying to keep up. I was just wondering how the council will be selected is one question, and then the other one is how the enforcement provisions will actually be rolled out and how compliance will take place. I understand that there's a new fund, but I just echoing what Marie said, that there's been issues with enforcement already. And I know that was an issue with the Illinois EJ Act as well. Like just making sure that things are going to be enforced. Those were my two questions.
Yeah, so on the council part, they are governor appointed with input from different I think the speaker and the Senate president and other stakeholders. But with the strong recommendation, if they can't literally require being from a disadvantaged community, that is the preference, of course. And on enforcement, I mean, absolutely, it's an issue. I think you can't get around. It's a big issue. I think the hope here and the intent of fines and fees is that they are high enough to discourage bad behavior. In the fines and fees of the random investigations, they are to ensure that there is enough monitoring there. That the system of like of monitoring where the pollution actually is in the first place is something that this is seeking to address, like the gaps that we know exist. And then once we know where things are, to use indirect source review to actually again, facility by facility, systematically go through and be able to mitigate that pollution. In incentivizing those facilities to take those steps off of the menu of things that we want them to be doing. But the biggest part is filling the gaps of where things are, where pollution is first with the monitoring, not continuously as well, not telling them, well, Wednesday at 10 a.m. we're going to check how much you have, be ready, and holding accountable and it being publicly accessible and transparent in that way as well.
I was just wondering like what the enforcement is for them holding to whatever is in their current permit, so them not exceeding the air quality standards. Or I know one of the biggest things with General Iron is they completely misrepresented the number of trucks that would be at the new development, like completely and utterly, because as Marie told you, they actually did the truck study. I mean, it was to the point of being ridiculous where I would just say they're lying. So that's what I'm talking about, enforcement, not just the enforcement of what you just talked about, but also like if there are gaps where a company's caught lying or misrepresenting what they're doing or not being accurate in some way. That's my question.
No, it's a great point. It's good feedback. That's the point of I think doing this, to identify our gaps and what we should be looking for. So thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to flag that this bill isn't set in stone. We have introduced it to LRB, who helped like draft it, and we will circulate the draft after this call for folks who are interested in reading, but there is opportunity for us to strengthen the bill based on the feedback. This was part of the webinar conversation tonight. Just hear what are some of the concerns or gaps that we haven't fully like thought through to make sure that we are taking those into account. So um deeply appreciate the questions and checkpoints that people are bringing in, and want to continue encouraging that. We do still have a few more questions in the chat, which this feels like just means that people are really interested in learning more. I think a little bit more on the enforcement piece. Madeline asks, with the random investigations, how will repercussions be enforced?
I mean, I think I attempted to address that, but with acknowledging the shortcomings that we discussed.
Yeah. So more for us to develop here. Sam?
Danny, could I jump in? Hey, y'all. My name is Sam Becker. I'm a project manager on EDF's Global Clean Air team. Excited to be here with everyone. So I do want to just mention that there are a few other states that are considering similar legislation, and one of the clauses within a bill that we're currently working on with some folks in New Jersey, it lays out standing for people who want to basically take a regulated warehouse to court. And so if it's the case that a regulated warehouse is not meeting its compliance obligations, then the text just kind of lays out, a pathway to determine, whether the legal or whether the regulated entity sort of misrepresented its compliance or was just not in compliance, and then requires that regulated entity to pay a significant sum of money. And I also do want to mention that if a regulated facility is not in compliance with its obligations, then it would cease to be eligible for a permit. And so, and so like, I think as someone who isn't a lawyer, I'm not totally sure, what that exactly means, but I'm pretty sure that if you're operating without a permit, you can quickly be shut down. So just some additional thoughts about how regulation and compliance obligations would function.
Thanks. Quick follow-up on that, Sam. Amalia asked, will this bill allow the standing for a community or resident to file a lawsuit? I think in the current language, we don't have that, but it's something that we can look into.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think it would be important to include a provision of that sort.
Perfect. Follow-up question. Annika asks, does the weather affect how damaging pollution is, and does this bill account for any of that manner?
I don't know if Sam, you have something to say about how it affects it, but I can say that the bill does account for any meteorological and satellite data being accounted for in the models used for the emissions inventories.
Yeah, I can just add maybe one thought here. So right now there are a bunch of monitors across the state that are not collecting pollution data continuously. In some cases, monitors are collecting data once a day, one in every 3 days, one in every 6 days. And so, the reality is that different weather can create, different sorts of serious pollution events. For instance, if there's like some sort of an inversion that is trapping a lot of pollution kind of at a level where people are inhaling it. And so these monitors just might not be picking up that sort of elevated pollution level. And so by requiring the state to switch its existing monitors to monitoring pollution continuously, I think we're doing our best to account for some of the variation that can result from different types of weather on a given day.
Annika, I hope that answered your question. Next question comes from Deirdre. I think the first one, will you just to re-clarify, do all provisions in this bill apply to truck attacking facilities that aren't warehouses? Example given intermodal rail yards.
The truck attracting facilities are required to monitor their emissions on the fence line, and do truck counts. The regulated facilities are the ones that are subject to the indirect source review. Those are the ones that are of a certain size or of concern to agency and community, that are the so-called indirect sources, because they attract, but they do not emit themselves.
Definitely. And the next question is there going to be dedicated funding for the new obligations this would play on IEPA? And that is a great question that we got to explore with IEPA, like what is going to be the funding necessary, and then for us to figure out how do we make sure those funds go into the IEPA for a particular bill.
It does, some of the fees and fines, as I mentioned, are directed to the trust fund for the IPA, but yeah, will be extra capacity needed, sure.
Perfect. The next question, Amalia asks, who supports this bill and what are plans to gauge Black Caucus, Latino Caucus, and leadership? Currently, Amalia, we've had really positive conversations with a lot of the legislators that have EJ communities in their districts. We've had positive conversations with Senator Cervantes, Teresa Ma, Norma Hernandez, Diavalar. I think there's opportunity for us to continue growing our conversation with the Black Caucus. And honestly, this is one of our ads that we're going to have for folks tonight is, we're going to ask folks to stay connected with us to help us have those conversations with their legislators, making sure that they're aware of this. And for us, within IEC and EDF, we're going to do the work downstate to continue bringing this to the leadership and making sure that we have strong support on this. But the folks that we have talked to, they're ready to put their name on it and really work the floor to get this moving. The next question I have from Diana is wondering how the two people from disadvantaged communities will be chosen. Will it be a lottery or something they have to apply for?
It's 4 minimum, and they're, as I think I mentioned, appointed by the and they can add more as desired non-voting members, but the 4 core members can vote.
Perfect. All right. Like I said earlier, all this information is just helping us, shape the bill, make it stronger. I think one thing that we'll do is take back all the feedback, information, questions that were presented tonight, and see what else we can add to the bill. We won't have an opportunity to fully add amendments till February 9th, but in that process, we would like to stay in open communication with y'all on changes and additions that are coming in, so we can ensure that your concerns are being addressed in the legislation. Because at the end of the day, this legislation is for y'all. Netta.
I was just wanted to say thanks for asking hard questions. It always makes things interesting, and makes a bill better. So I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Another question in the chat for you, Netta. Will everyone signed up for the webinar receive the slides?
Absolutely.
Perfect. I will make sure that the slides go out as well with the most current language of the bill so folks can review it. But before we let you all go, I do want to ask folks, I think several of you have already made this commitment to sign up for a letter of support. But we do have a new question in this letter of support. I think a lot of folks who came to this webinar tonight have experienced the hardships that come with diesel pollution. And one of the biggest ways that we can get awareness at the state level is making sure that we have voices of impacted communities telling their stories in front of the state legislature. So if folks are interested in being a speaker at an upcoming subject matter hearing or committee hearing, we would love to get that information to make sure that we're staying connected so we can let you all know when those hearings are coming up, help prep anyone who needs support in developing their public commentary. Diana, I'm gonna have to double check. I know in the most recent years they have allowed people to zoom in, but the state legislature is starting to go back into in person, and I'm not sure what the rules are this year, but if there is availability to do Zoom or video conferencing, we will confirm that for y'all. So folks, please, I will follow up with folks with this email as well on the Google form. And really, really thankful for the questions, the comments, and pushing back on what else can be possible with this bill. So I'll pause there, see if there's any other questions before we wrap up. All right. Well, thank you all. We'll follow up with an email in the next couple days, and really appreciate everyone who came out tonight. And Netta and Sam, thank you so much for the hard work that y'all put into developing this bill, and we'll continue working on this. All right, y'all. I will let y'all